Enough was enough. I had heard and seen too much devastation to the tigers across India and Asia to sit around and do nothing. I couldn't stand by and allow humans to continue the cruel slaughter of the beautiful animals that I had admired for years. Not only are they stunning, they're completely harmless to the everyday human. As long as you didn't aggravate a tiger, then they simply have no need to hurt you. Many times they're poached for their beautiful pattern hide, which is honestly something that humans can and do make artificially in factories without needing to harm the beautiful animals. Their skins are valued by traditional Buddhist monasteries as well as contemporary Asian celebrities who wear them as status symbols. In 2015, a tiger skin could sell for about $16,880. It's ridiculous. Teeth and claws are also used as status symbols, and bones are also highly sought out for use in traditional medicines and health tonics that have no scientific backing. But some people will believe anything, I suppose, and the dangerously naive will believe that random tiger parts will cure them of anything from insomnia to alcoholism. This has created a ridiculous demand for tigers, which has been met through illegal poaching. The most common tiger, the Bengal tiger, only has about 2,500 individuals remaining in the wild. Despite all of this, poachers are driven by greed and the thrill of the hunt, insisting on harming these beautiful animals to reap a profit. It broke my heart to know that they were being mercilessly hunted. You know, once, while transformed as a tiger, I was enjoying the company of a mother and a cub. And while the cub was playfully batting the mother's tail, a hunter snuck up on us. My close affinity with nature allowed me to sense the slight rustling of the bushes and the crunch of his boots as he inched closer, aiming a gun towards us. I quickly took action. In a snap, his weapon was entangled in vines and pulled high into the closest tree. The ground beneath his feet suddenly became a soggy, sticky mud. His balance thrown off and his weapon out of reach, he began to flail wildly. He began to sink deeper into his muddy entrapment. By the time he was up to his neck, he was screaming, begging for help. I made the mud harden and motioned for the mother and cub to leave the area. A few hours later, after allowing him to boil in the sun, I sent some human police to pick up the criminal who was later charged with illegal hunting. But this sort of situation is all too common. I do try my best not to intervene too obviously in the affairs of humans, but sometimes, like in that case, I really just can't help but get involved. Animals often have no voice, and so their pleas fall on deaf ears. Or they just sound like threatening animal noises, which is usually much worse. I don't want to think about how many cubs have lost their mothers at the hands of poachers. It hurts to imagine how many innocent cubs have died without the guidance from them, just because somebody was greedy. A lot of the world's problems could be ended if we could just eliminate that obnoxious and harmful desire. Other times, though, I get quite intentionally involved, such as in this case of the infamous poacher who was known as Wild Raju. Wild Raju had been illegally hunting tigers in Bangladesh for years. I'd been checking on the case every so often, hoping that the local police would be able to handle it. But nearly 20 years had come and passed. The tiger population has been declining at an alarming rate because of hunting and habitat loss, and I just couldn't let things stand. I couldn't let things continue any further. I transformed into my human form, appearing as nothing more than an ordinary human with glorious pink hair. Apparently that's not very professional, but I'm a goddess with a mission, and I've got gray hair. The humans can deal with it. So after I transformed, I found the local wildlife police division, who were tasked with the case. They didn't welcome me at first, but their tune changed when I presented them with God's notes. That's a story for a whole other adventure, from a whole nother adventure, mind you. But the important bit to know about that is that it takes the shape of whatever human identity card most fits the situation. In this instance, It showed the task force officers that I was a specialist from another division, being sent in to help close the case. So once we had the formalities out of the way, they brought me up to speed. They were stuck. Every time they got a lead, they tried to close in and take the poacher by surprise, but somehow he always managed to elude them. Under the guise of better understanding the terrain, I told the group that I would be going to survey the land. They were a silly bunch, believing that it was unsafe for me to go by myself. But I suppose that's to be expected. Not only was I posing as a human, I also appeared to be a petite woman. Such a struggle for young women to be treated as equals sometimes. I had to shake one of them off my trail when they insisted on accompanying me. As well-intentioned as they may have been, I wanted to keep my interference in this matter relatively low-key, so I didn't exactly want them to see me transform. After losing the other officer in the trees, I shapeshifted into a regal tiger. I lifted my furry paw and inwardly smiled as I saw the emblem on my soft paw pads. I usually see my family's emblem on my medallion or jewelry, so it's always fascinating to see how it camouflages itself into my transformations. After a quick stretch, I took off into the forest. Through my heightened senses, I was able to catch the scent of another tiger. I found a lone tiger resting who became alert as I approached. "Hello. Please don't worry, I'm not here for anything other than information, and the information I want is only to help you." The tiger responded hopelessly. "Please go. They'll find you too." I only managed to escape because there was a forest guard nearby who intervened. But I don't know how much further I can go. My eyes widened as I got closer. The tiger's leg was bloodied, and an iron trap was clamped tight onto it. The creature was in an enormous amount of pain. My heart broke just looking at the pain this creature was forced to endure. I looked around, searching for a nearby water source. I closed my eyes and heard the sounds of a bubbling brook nearby. I focused, and soon small bubbles of water came floating through the trees, clumping together to form a large pool. As I filled the water with my magic, it began to glow a brilliant blue and green hue. Once I was satisfied with its composition, I directed it to the tiger. Both entranced and fearful, the tiger attempted to back away, but the pain held it still. I motioned for it to stay still. "Don't be afraid. It's okay. I'm going to take away the pain, but first I need to remove that terrible contraption from you. To do that, I'm going to transform to look like a human. Don't run. Oh, and don't attack me either. That wouldn't be very nice." The tiger looked at me with wide eyes. It was like I had 5 heads. But she nodded. I transformed and approached the very tense tiger. "Easy. This will only take a moment." I quickly gripped the trap and pulled it open before tossing it aside. Then I motioned for the healing waters to coat the injuries. The water drizzled down the tiger, cleaning the wound, easing the ache, and delicately closing the previously ripped skin back together. After a few moments, it was as if there had been no injury at all. She was stunned. "What? Who are you?" I smiled. "I'm Lotl, and I'm here to help with the wild Raju problem that you have in this area." The tiger bowed. "The Lotl? Goddess of nature? I have heard of you. Thank you so much for helping me. I feel as good as new. I could run for miles." She stood up and pounced, testing out the newfound strength. "Wait, shouldn't you have some stuff on your head? And a tail?" I laughed and shifted my feathery axolotl gills and tail into existence. "Yes, I do have those. They're not always convenient when I travel, though." The tiger roared with joy, and we enjoyed the moment together. I learned that the tiger's name was Lily, and she had been caught in a hidden trap when she had gone to get a drink at the creek. Luckily, when she roared in pain, a local forest guard, maybe the same one I snuck off from, came to the rescue. They scared off the poacher who had been lurking nearby as Lily made her escape. but since she had been injured, she was almost assuredly going to be caught later on if I hadn't come along, especially since there were bloody paw prints leading right to her. Lily, you need to leave now. Now that you're cleaned up and healed, you'll be all right. I'm going to set a trap of my own. The tigress left, and I transformed into a bird so I could survey the land from above. On the border of Bangladesh and India, I could see someone who was clearly following the tracks that Lily had left. They weren't wearing a forest guard uniform. They were clearly a poacher, but there wasn't a way to be sure if they were the infamous Wild Raju. Either way, they were a problem, and I wasn't going to let them continue peacefully, especially since this was a forest that poachers had been banned from. This person's willingness to go against the rules and hurt animals for their own personal gain infuriated me beyond belief. I smiled inwardly as I flew overhead, watching the scene unfold. The poor, unsuspecting hunters suddenly found themselves tripping over every tree trunk. Mosquitoes from the nearby mangrove forest swarmed them. They coincidentally rubbed up against some poisonous plants, and then it began to pour. They were having quite an unlucky day. They seemed to realize that too, and within just a few minutes, they took off in the direction of a nearby village. Once they entered a building, I summoned a terrible storm to sit on top of the village to ensure the poacher would stay put for the night. I soared back towards the rest of the officers, many miles away, and transformed back to my human self at a sight. When I entered the building, I was greeted with looks of relief and anger. "It's been hours! Where did you go? There was even a poaching attempt." I nodded and gave an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry for worrying you. But don't worry, I've got a clue. I spoke with someone who gave a tip on the assurance of anonymity that there is a poacher over in a village a few miles from here." The others looked at me with disbelief. "How do you know it's credible?" Oh, it's always very frustrating when you know something to be true, but then you have to explain it in a secretive way. I smiled and explained. "They saw a poaching attempt today and ran into me while they were following the poacher from a distance. They wanted to report it but didn't know who to trust. I convinced them to trust me." They looked at each other, unsure. Then one of them spoke up. "All right, good enough for me. If you've got a lead, let's investigate it. Best case, it's Wild Raju. Worst case, sounds like we've got another poacher out of the forest. So let's go. Lead the way." I smiled as we got into the vehicles and headed for the village. By the time we arrived, it was early Saturday morning. The pounding thunder and rain hid our arrival from prying eyes and ears as we made our way to the building where I saw the person enter. The rest of the officers burst through the door, searching the building for occupants. I waited outside, allowing them to do their work and guarding the exit. A few minutes later, I heard the officers excitedly announcing, "We've caught Wild Raju!" The man in question, of course, denied everything, but a few minutes later, there was a sad hush. "He's got a cub here, sir." I immediately came into the building to see an open closet showing a cage with a small tiger cub trapped inside. My heart shattered at the sight of the tiny cub. He looked lost, sad, and above all, truly heartbroken. I could hardly look at the poacher as they detained him and took him away. "I'm trained for this. You take care of the man, I'll take care of getting the little one rehabilitated and back to the wild." The rest of the team was silent. I've been told that sometimes when I'm emotionally focused about something, it comes across as something you can't just disagree with. I'm not sure if that's part of my goddess powers or not, but it definitely has come in handy. I carefully opened the cage and lifted the trembling tiger. It was still so young. I spoke to it, but it didn't say much. All it had ever known was its mother's warmth and comfort, and that had been stripped away from him without a care in the world. He was frozen in place, his tail tucked in between his legs. I hugged the tiger, wrapping it in a familiar natural sense. It perked up when it smelled the scent of another tiger. "Shh, it's okay." Knowing that the cub had been calmed allowed me to be more at ease. Wild Raju was believed to have killed at least 70 endangered Bengal tigers. But today, we saved this little baby, and we succeeded in putting an end to his reign of terror. The sky cleared as I walked into the forest. I transformed into a tiger and nuzzled the cub. Come, let's get you back home. We searched, asked for directions from the local wildlife, and swam across marshy mangrove swamps. Eventually, we found a tigress who had been lamenting her stolen cub. The reunion was so heartwarming and rewarding. I stayed with them for a few hours to allow them to fully enjoy each other's company without worry of any further human intrusion. Then I made my return back to Persephone's ship. A few days later, I was drinking tea with Persephone and was pleased to read comments from the local papers. I smiled at her and excitedly said, "Check out this news article." Local police chiefs said that the fugitive poacher had been evading multiple raids in the past by fleeing before the police arrived. However, on June 1st, the law enforcers caught hold of the 50-year-old. Acting on a tip-off, we finally succeeded in catching Wild Raju and sent him to jail. A local resident commented, "He's a dangerous man who could fight alone with tigers inside the forest." The regional forest conservation officer said that the news of the arrest had brought sighs of relief, and he was a big headache and posed a great threat to the forest's biodiversity. I took a big sip of my tea and leaned back with a smile. Wonder what I'll do next. All right, so that is my adventure. And this is the art that goes along with it.